So I spent the summer living in a commune, having a good time, doing lots and lots of drugs again. I went to my first gay pride event in Portland, Oregon. That was a really cool thing because that summer was the summer I discovered that I really liked girls and men. I liked everybody. I'm definitely omnisexual. And that was when I discovered I was bisexual. I ended up having sex with there was a couple that lived across the street, and I had sex with them. And at first I'm like, well, maybe I'm not bisexual because I wasn't really that attracted to her, but I was really attracted to her husband. But it was still kind of fun. And then I started, my first group sex was with them and then with these two guys. And I did a lot of exploring that summer. And so I was in Portland because I lived in the Vancouver, Washington area, where that was where the commune was. And so I went to Portland one day, and I didn't know it was going to be a pride festival. I just thought that I was going to go wander the streets of Portland, and I stumbled into this little gated area with all these little booths. And there were all these queer people. Now, this is in 1971. This is like the first time anything like this had been in Portland. And I'm wandering through, and I'm just amazed at all these wonderful people that I'm falling in love with, like beautiful and smart, and it was just a tiny little thing. And I came around the corner, and I'm leaving, and I'm walking down these steps, and at the bottom of the steps is this guy with a Bible, and these two guys holding this huge banner with people burning in flames. And he points at me and he goes, "You homosexual." And I went, "Me? You queer." And back then, queer was a pejorative. I don't know if those of us that are older remember that. And he starts yelling at me about how Jesus would want me to go to hell and all this. Now remember, I was raised fundamentalist. I know my Bible. So I start speaking the Bible back to him. And I'm talking about, judge not that you be judged yourself, and kind of the basic stuff. And I'm really calm, and I'm very quiet in my responses. And he's spitting and sputtering, and he's just kind of reminds you of the way the politics are going on right now, the fundamentalists. It was really weird. And I'd never encountered this kind of hatred from a Christian before. My family, although some of them were really weird, they were all very loving. In fact, if all Christians were like my grandma, I'd love all Christians. But this man was full of hatred, and I'm just quietly talking to him, and I'm just telling him my story, and I'm like, "You don't know me, and God would not want you to be yelling at me like this," and And then I stop, and I look, and there's like 50 people standing listening, and they applauded me. And I'm like, wow. What an amazing feeling to have these people thought that I was doing something good, and I just was having a conversation with this stupid minister. And that was what started me, when I look back, on my road towards where I ended up in the sex-positive community, was having this encounter. A couple years later, because I want to tell you about another encounter I had, because it was in Portland also. A couple years later, I was in... it was that same year, because I snuck into a dyke bar in Portland, because I was too young to drink. But I snuck into a bar and I sat up at the counter with there was this beautiful, beautiful blonde lesbian. She was so gorgeous and so beautiful, and I was just in love, and I was just like, oh my God. And then she tells me something that I knew a little bit about because of a few things that had been happening on the stories that had happened in the news. She'd tell me she was a transsexual. And I'm like, what? And I'd heard of Christine Jorgensen and stuff, because that was kind of big then. And I'm like, and then I did the stupid Idaho girl, dumb shit, fuck shit. I asked her stupid questions. My apologies to all my trans friends. I was so dumb. I'm like, so did you get it cut off? It was really bad. And to her credit, she was kind and wonderful. And she told me the truth. She was post-op. Her parents had paid for her operation. This is in 1971. That is unheard of. Her parents had paid for her operation. However, she had to live as a man. She had to live as a woman for a year before she could start her treatments, her operation. So she went to work as a woman, and her boss says, "I hired a man. You're fired," and nothing she could do about it. So she ended up becoming a sex worker. So this is the first trans woman I'd ever met, and the first sex worker I ever met. And she was so lovely. She actually was great. This is when she was a sex worker, it was pre-op, and she's like, if those guys that I was sucking their dick knew that I had a dick, they would have just shit. And she was just cracking me up. She was so funny. And she was actually even there was some kind of documentary, and she was in it. I mean, she's just really a neat woman. And unfortunately, I left Portland, left the area shortly after that, because I would have liked to stay in touch with her. But she totally changed my life too. It was just like, those two incidences were my aha moments that when I look back at, totally changed how I looked at the whole world. So I'm only up to 18, and I'm 66, so there's some more coming. So, since I was a hippie, I went back to Idaho, to Nampa for a short period of time because I got homesick, but then I left again. And, I got to tell you why I left the second time. It was the police, too. I had my own apartment then. I was looking for work, couldn't find work. It was really hard. And my dad was helping me, but I had my own apartment. And I found these hitchhikers, runaway girls. They were like 12 and 13, 14-year-olds. There were three of them. And I took them in because they needed somebody. One of the girls had been sexually abused by her dad. They needed somebody to take care of him. So I took him into my little place. At the same time, I had a couple of hitchhikers hanging out at my place. I had a little mini commune, living there. That was an interesting weekend. That was our interesting winter. That was the winter that I had a miscarriage, and here's this thing: as those of you who are young, you got to think about this. I had a miscarriage before I found out I was pregnant, but if I would have found out I was pregnant, I would have had an abortion. But back in 1971, it would have been a backstreet abortion in Idaho, and I would have probably died. So, thank the gods I had the miscarriage, but I went through that. I went through all kinds of weird stuff. And one day, I hear a knock on the door, and I throw on a pair of jeans and this shirt that's got peace, love, written all over it. It's a t-shirt. And I answer the door, and there is a police officer. He looked just like Roy Rogers. Those of you who are old will know who Roy Rogers is. He was so fucking hot. His name was Mel. So Mel's like, I understand you have some runaways here. And I'm like, oh, you want to. Meanwhile, luckily, one of the guys is making sure they got all out of bed and were getting dressed. And anyhow, so I got arrested. That was my first real arrest. And I got taken to court. I put in a cell. I got put in the drunk tank because they didn't really have cells for women, which are weird, right? And so I go to see the judge, and the judge is like really, and he says, well, if you would just quit this peace, love crap, because my shirt said peace, love, and get a job, and put on a dress, comb your hair, and get a job, maybe you would make something of yourself. And this is the quote that I said to the judge: Your Honor, for the last 3 months, I've looked for a fucking job. I put on a dress, put on makeup, combed my hair, and I can't find a fucking job in this fucking county anywhere. And he went, 3 days in jail, boom, right? And so I was a smoker back then, so I kept bumming cigarettes from Mel, Sheriff Mel. And so Sheriff Mel comes to me after one day. I've been there a whole day. He goes, you want to blow this joint? And I said, oh, yeah. He says, I went and talked to the judge. You're out. Get out of here. And so thanks to Sheriff Mel, he let me out. So I decided, fuck it, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to California where the hippies can really be hippies and blah, blah, blah. So I end up in the Bay Area, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but that was an adventure too, getting there. I ended up in the Bay Area, living with this guy named Earl, having a great time, being a hippie chick, and that's when I really got into LSD and mescaline and psilocybin and you name it, I was doing it. I also got addicted to barbiturates. So I went through an addiction thing. Luckily, it was only a physical addiction thing. When my supply ran out and I went through the heebie-jeebies for about 4 days. I never wanted to do another downer after that. I do not have the addictive personality, but physical addictions are true. And I was loving my downers. I was totally addicted to barbiturates. At the same time, I realized that I wanted to find my mother. I had just been thinking a lot about her. By then, I'm 19 years old. So I wrote my dad's mom, my grandma Piercy, and I'm like, do you have any idea where my mother is? And she said, yeah. She wrote me back. She goes, you have 3 brothers, and your mother lives in Imperial Beach, California, which is by San Diego, and here's her address. I've been keeping touch with her all these years so that and sending her pictures of you so that she knows that you're alive and doing well. Yeah. So I don't leave immediately because I have no idea what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to do this, and I really want to see my mother. So one day Earl tells me, and I wasn't in love with Earl. He was just a guy to live with and to have sex with. And Earl's like, I'm going to move, and I'm going to move to, in fact, ironically, he moved up here to Seattle, which I never remembered his last name, so I could never find him when I finally got up here. But he says, I'm going to move to Seattle. And I said, oh, great, I think I want to go down to San Diego. So my best friend Nancy and I stuck her thumbs. Now, I did not call my mother. I did not write my mother. I just hitchhiked down to San Diego. Just, and Nancy and I, we get to Imperial Beach. I walk up to this house. I knock on the door, and this teenage boy answers the door, and I said, hello, I'm your sister. Now, my brothers had only found out about me 3 months before I showed up. My mother had told everybody I died at birth because my mom never thought she would ever see me again because so my mother was 16 when they divorced, and a 16-year-old girl in 1953 has no agency. And her mother, my grandmother on her side, who was not a nice woman, would not help her take care of me. So my mother was not allowed to keep me because she was still a minor. So just think about agency and that kind of thing. So I'm like, so where's mom? And my brothers are like, she's playing, my mother was single at the time, she's playing pool at this, she's in a pool tournament at this bar. I said, you know the name of the bar? And they go, yeah. And back then, this is back when you called up a place and the phone was on the wall, right? So I call up the bar, and I'm like, is Nadine Wiederhoff there? Because that was her name at the time. And they went, just about it, Nadine Wiederhoff, and she answers the phone, and I'm like, hi, this is your daughter, Allena. And she goes, that's a terrible joke. I said, it's not a joke. I'm in your living room right now. I think she made the 20 miles in about 10 minutes. I mean, she got home really fast. And she and I sat up till 6 a.m. talking and crying and talking and crying and talking and crying. Now, my father's version of why he divorced my mom and my mom's version of why they divorced were completely different. I'll be really honest, I believe my mom more than I believe my dad. My dad had shit. He told me he never loved my mom. And the reality is my mom broke his heart. And because, on their wedding night, he said this, I'm going to raise you like you need to be raised. Yeah, and my mom and I have a very similar personality. Where I got some of my shit, I got it from my mom. And that didn't set with her. In fact, she did kidnap me and run away with me for when they were going through the divorce, but she got caught. That was another reason why she was not allowed to see me. So all of a sudden, I've got 3 brothers. And it turns out that one of my brothers looks kind of like my dad. I'm like, my oldest brother. And it turns out that Danny is my father's son. But he was born when they tried to get back together and they had sex. Mom said, we didn't know anything about safer sex. We just thought if you didn't want to get pregnant, you didn't get pregnant. But obviously that didn't work. And so my brother Danny was my full-blooded brother. So I have a full-blooded brother and 2 half-brothers. I did. One of my brothers passed away from HIV and drugs. And then, I'll get to the some other stuff later. But so I have these brothers, and I have this mom, and she's single, and she's a party girl. Mom and I used to go out and dance together. We used to go out and play, go to bars together. I'm underage, and she'd tell people I'm her cousin. Nobody would question. I'm drinking and partying with my mom. We're having this great time. Until one night, she runs into an old boyfriend, and he's like, Nadine, you want to come and spend the night? And she goes, well, my cousin's with me. He goes, oh, she can sleep on the couch. And I'm like, I knew my mom was sexually active. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. The fucker had a studio apartment. Bed, couch. Now, I'm going to say that my mom was louder than I am. And I told my mom after that, I said, we can't go do things like this anymore. I had to create a boundary because it was a little awkward listening to my mother have sex. And And shortly after that, she met Alan, the man that she married and was together until the day she died. And Alan was 20. My mother was 36. Alan was 26. My mother likes him young. And he was a young sailor, and they ended up with the most amazing marriage ever. It was just the best. So I met the man that would become my first husband, Michael. He lived next door to my mom. He became my acid supplier. In fact, my first date with him, because I knew he was going to give me, I would get free acid. Again, remember, I am definitely into my drugs. Oh, just so you know, I've been married 4 times. Michael was my first. There's Michael, Gary, Fred, and Steve. Kind of normal names. I like being the center of attention, and I like weddings. So I kept saying yes. And I'll talk about each of them as we go by. So Michael and I, Michael was the epitome of the hippie dude. He would be happy to make $3 an hour the rest of his life as long as he could buy pot. I mean, that was just Michael. He was long-haired, cool dude. We got married, and he had been in the service, so it wasn't like he was dodging the draft or anything, but this was during the Vietnam War, and we both realized that we really didn't care for America at that time. And so we decided that we were going to go to Canada. And he had relatives in Campbell River. Whoops, excuse me. He had relatives in Campbell River, and we were going to go up there and work in a logging place. I was going to cook, and he was going to log, and we were going to go to Canada. And so we had a dog, a hippie van. Our bed is in the van, and we had a German Shepherd dog, and we had maybe $100 and some dog food and a carton of cigarettes, and we headed north. And we stopped at a few places to say goodbye to family and friends. So we took about 3 weeks heading up, and we ended up at the border up here. The laws had been changed the week before, and we got turned away at the border. And we're like, well, shit. Well, Seattle was the closest big city, so we went to Seattle. And back then, they used to have these really strange Christian crash pads. There's this one called the Maranatha's. Brother John ran it. And all the women slept upstairs. You remember that, yeah? Brother John had to preach every day. He was a long-haired hippie guy. And the women slept upstairs and the men slept downstairs. We slept in our van. There was no way we were going to do that. But if we wanted to eat, we had to listen to him preach every day. It was just a hoot. So we spent about a week at the Maranatha's. And one day we picked up a hitchhiker named Ed, and we're telling him how, that we'd just gotten here, and we weren't sure if we were going to make it to Canada, if they were going to let us across, and Michael was looking for work. And Ed's like, oh, you can come and live with if you give me a ride home, we have a room that you can rent. And it was a garage that had been turned into a room. So we rented that from him. So he stayed. Now, I've got lots and lots of stories about all the fun times I had with Michael and stuff.